All right, welcome everybody. We've got another episode of Lifestyle Medicine, and today we've got Daniel Laggner. So, Daniel, thank you for being here, man.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So, Daniel, I've known you for some years, right? Because you're married to Deva. Shout out to Deva for all of her awesome
Yeah,
acupuncture
shout
work.
out.
Yeah. So, but I started following you on social media a little bit and just getting glimmers of what you were doing. And you had a pretty cool dialogue with hunting. You were hunting small game, going on hunting trips, but you seemed very well versed in it. And I know, didn't you do some kind of, was it survival type courses that you did as well, like outdoor education, something or other? What was it that
Yeah,
you
that's
were?
right.
What
Yeah.
what were you
Yeah.
doing? And give us a background on that, like your hunting, what you've done, just so people kind of know what you've been doing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I come from a fairly colorful background as it pertains to wilderness things. But what you're referring to was a guide outfit that my brother and I ran for from 2010 till 2017. Ended up being about 8 seasons.
Oh wow.
So we did backpacking trips. We started with rock climbing, but it ended up pretty quickly after about 2 years going more towards the wilderness, multi-day in the mountains. So it ended up turning into mostly backpacking, and then in the last 4 years, we did those 3-day wilderness survival courses as well. And that's, I think, what you were referring to, which are in the backcountry. So you hike in, bring minimal gear, but we do bring food and some shelter and some comforts, and then that lends itself to a really good learning environment where you have the comforts, but you're also in the wilderness and ready to just practice some of those skills.
And when you would take people out, what were some of the real time skills that people were doing? Can you give us some for instances? Like what are you teaching them during over the course of those 3 days? What are some of the activities that they go through?
Yeah, so that was the beginner course that I was describing, and that
Oh,
one revolved around the four basic elements of survival, which is fire, water, shelter, and food. And so we essentially covered all those four elements in detail categorically. And we started out with fire, and so learning how to create fire under certain circumstances that are not straightforward. So you end up walking out of that course with probably 5 or 6 ways of creating fire.
wow.
Um, yeah, and then moving on to shelter. We had
Can I ask a
basically,
quick question there about
yeah, go
just
ahead.
about the fire? So,
Sure.
and I'm assuming without the use of matches, or are you teaching them?
Right.
Yeah, so you're teaching them techniques
It,
that don't involve the luxury.
well, you'd be surprised. We actually started with matches, right? So we actually
Yeah,
started like,
fair
okay,
enough.
so what's the simplest version, right? You're in the
Right,
woods, you have matches, or you have a bake lighter or something like that. How do you start a fire? And you'd be
right.
amazed how few people actually understand the basic concepts of making a fire.
Yeah,
How you use the fuel to really create a good source of heat. You need some source of tinder to ignite the kindling, to ignite the fuel, and then how do you make that fuel last, and how do you manage that? So we started actually with proper ignition sources as we see them in the front country, as we call it.
yeah.
And then we did move on to more primitive methods.
Gotcha.
We didn't really deal so much with friction methods, which would be your most extreme version of that, because it takes a long time. You could have your own 3-day course just for friction fires.
Wow.
But we would do demonstrations and indicators of how to use those friction methods. But we really focused a lot of time on how to identify and acquire the resources that the especially coniferous forest around you are willing to give you. So being able to understand what the forest can offer and how to utilize that to make fire, even if it's with a flint or spark, or with a lighter if you have it. But basically understanding the forest more as a place of resource rather than having very specific ways of igniting your fire. So
Gotcha.
that was Yeah, and then we ended up just doing a lot of activities. It was like short lecture activity in small groups, 2 to 3 people in a group and 12 people for the whole team. And then we just move on. And the same thing for shelter. We have like the primitive methods of doing shelter where it's just the resources from the forest and then making the shelter of things that you have available to you. Maybe you have some clothing, maybe you even have like a little tarp or anything, even a backpack can be utilized in specific ways for using cordage or stuff like that that could help build shelters.
Yeah.
So whatever you have available to you, we basically, the whole course was all around what do you have available and how can you maximize that for survival situations.
Right.
So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. I mean, it's relevant as all hell. And I have to ask this question, right?
Yeah.
I'm playing devil's advocate here. People will
Go.
say, well, we're in modern times, so what's the relevance of knowing how to do this stuff?
Right.
And I would, the answer seems obvious to me. But what do people say that kind of thing, and they're
Yeah.
saying like, why should we have these skills when we have, we have temperature controlled environments and we've got pretty much every luxury we could possibly imagine. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, okay, so the short answer is that our survival courses were tailored to those people that recreate in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. So it really filters out that demographic that's actually going into the wilderness on day hikes, on backpacking trips, on hunting trips. Maybe it's a search and rescue, somebody who's a volunteer search and rescue or something like that, somebody who's or a mountain biker. Somebody's frequently exposed to the wilderness and may not have all the resources on their body in the event of some kind of scenario that would prohibit them from being able to escape the wilderness.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the simple solution is, somebody really likes day hiking and they bring their day pack, and in the day pack is a bottle of water, a snack, their phone. If they're really smart, an extra layer of clothing, but even often that's not there. And that's really often what people bring, and that's it. Some odds and ends, and that course is perfect for those people. But and then all of a sudden they get locked in by a storm, or they get lost and it's dark and they don't know how to navigate, or they get off trail and they can't find the trail again. And that's the scenarios that we were dealing with.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can speak from experience. Back in 2009, I got with a buddy of mine. We got lost. I mean, it happens. People we were hiking,
no kidding,
and we got lost in the Trinity Alps. So we were supposed to be a day trip, and it turned into 3. And it's a crazy story. I'll tell it another time. But we ended up having to. Wow. We ended up breaking into an abandoned cabin out in the middle of the woods. We didn't have to break a window. We left a note with our contact info saying sorry, but we had to get into your place because we were sopping wet and we were out of food. I mean, it was a mess. And I remember thinking back then, I thought, God, just for people that are, like you said, that are recreationally outdoors consistently, it probably behooves most of us just to know the basics, right? Just in case shit hits the fan and we're stuck somewhere. So that always stayed with me. That's great that you were doing it. So again, just go through those. It was fire, water, shelter, and what was the fourth? Fire, water, shelter, food.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you would take these people out. You said 3 days, 3-day courses.
3 days. Yeah.
3 days. Now, in terms of food, can we talk about that a little bit? Were you hunting food for them while they were out, or did you were you working with the resources that people had? Like, oh, I've got my power bar. Therefore, how do we ration this? Like, how do you navigate the food scene?
Food was one of the things that I probably spent most time on in developing this curriculum because it's the least relevant. Because if you have a 72-hour survival scenario, you actually don't need any food at all. Yeah. So that's kind of the conundrum, right? How much do you teach on food acquisition when you're in a survival scenario, when it really takes 10 days before you really start considering that food is the cause of potential death. Right. You'll get weak. Your decision making starts, with the lack of glucose in the brain, your decision making definitely gets compromised and things like that. But for the most part, food is such a low priority that we generally just did it via lecture and then identified some wild edibles in the wilderness, and that was mainly it. We categorized the easiest access form of foods as, of course, the wild edibles are going to be your easiest ones, like berries and nettles and then potentially even acorns if those are available. Pine cones, things like that are really easy to access and don't take a lot of effort. I would put acorns on the side of that because it does take some effort for that.
Yeah.
But those are food sources that are not going to run away from you. And
Right.
if you know how to identify them and process them, then it's a pretty good resource. And then moving on to kind of a more difficult version would be your insects and larvae. And
Yeah.
then from then on would be your amphibians and reptiles. And then maybe you get into rodentia and then into the bigger mammals and birds. But those, you really, in a survival scenario, nobody's going to be going after birds or big mammals. It's
Right,
just
right.
impossible.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
maybe some insects, but that's about it.
It's a bit cumbersome, right, to go after the big things.
Indeed.
And so then and then for water, yeah, how did you?
Yeah.
What was that piece like?
Water to me is the most interesting one because I mean, in theory, you could go a few days without water and be fine, right? You could, in theory, go 72 hours and not really have any major ill effects. But in about 24 hours, and I've tested this on myself, and in about 24 hours without water, the emotion of thirst is so potent that it can outweigh your thought processes to a point of leading to a very rapid downward spiral of initial doubts to very rapidly going to full-on despair.
Yeah.
And so it's really one of those situations that you have to manage.
Oh, we lost you for a second. Are you still there? All right, people. So we lost connection just for a quick second. Hopefully, Daniel will kick back on here up in a second. Well, let's see what happened. This is the lovely part of live recording. This is the way it goes, people. You're recording a podcast and you're dependent upon the mechanism of Skype, and then it falls apart. But let's see if we can get him back on. There you are.
Hey.
Beautiful. Okay, cool, man. Well, we had our first little bump. I had to riff there for a minute.
Oh man.
So you were frozen. Yeah, it's all good. This is like the way
Sorry
it goes.
about that.
That's okay. It's not your fault. It's just the way, Skype and recording, when you're doing this kind of stuff, you're dependent upon it. So it's okay. It's just part of the package of
crazy.
distance podcasting.
Yeah, no worries.
So you were talking about the emotion of thirst, which I really like.
Yes.
I like that phrase quite a bit because I've never thought about it like that, but that's very much it's very true, I would say. And I've done a little bit of dry fasting, just exploring it from the health perspective, right? Just no water for 24 hours to see what the body does. And I agree, at 24 hours, there's a very real, it's not a panic, but I'm very aware that I want water. Like it's different than, I've fasted for, a week without food before, and it's not the same thing. Not even.
It's manageable. Yeah. It's
correct.
It's an emotion that's more manageable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, but,
so pick up from where you were, because like you said, you froze in the piece here. But so we were talking about you were saying the emotion of thirst, and then the spiral, right? It's a downward spiral for people.
Yeah.
They just start making shitty decisions, it sounds like, when that hits.
So, exactly. Yeah. So basically what it comes down to is that, yes, you can go for 72 hours and not be really of risk of dying if you're a person of average health. But like I said, within 24 hours, you can get to a point where if you don't have incredible mental strength and will, then you're at very high risk of going to an emotional place that will lead you to despair. And then can inevitably lead you to a place where you could die because of that. So I did put a lot of focus into water, and the only water is a really complicated thing in the wilderness, because if you're in a place and where you don't know where water is, the only things that you can do are look at the terrain and make some educated assumptions on where you think water will begin to gather, and head for that. And then, we teach about riparian zones and how to locate from a high vantage point, how to locate areas that are higher moisture than others, so just visible in the land. And then once you access water, finally, then you're dealing with pathogens, and you're dealing with potential sources that could cause further harm to your body. So we taught how to deal with those situations. And so there's a bunch of, in the end, what all of the lessons came back down to is be prepared by bringing ways to treat water, and even a container to carry water, because without that can be troublesome.
Right, the basics. Right.
Yeah, the basic things. So that's kind of what it all comes back down to, right? And I guarantee you that all those people on those courses are now bringing containers.
Yeah,
that they can. Yeah. So it's an interesting topic, and it often ended up in a more of a discussion rather than a lecture, and then of course some activities too. Yeah.
Wow. So with those courses, you said those ran from 2010 to 2017. Is that right?
The survival courses themselves only for the latter 3 years.
Oh, okay. Got it. And so if people, I take it you're not doing these anymore at the moment?
No, I'm not. Nope.
So if people wanted to explore this and they wanted to, be a part of something this, like another type of course like this, where would people look? Like, what resources where should they kind of point to if they want to explore this and get well versed in basic survival?
I'm happy to say those courses are still running, and they're just not being run by me. So so it's Treks and Tracks, TREKS and TRACKS. Treks like trekking, and tracks like animal tracks.
Right.
That's the website, and those courses are still being offered.
Beautiful. Okay, that's a great resource. So that's really good to know. Well, let's segue into the hunting piece, because that's been a big. I've been wanting to pick your brain for the past couple of years, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just conversations where I'm like, I've seen you go out. You're posting stuff. I connected you to Daniel Vitalis, who's got that rewilding platform, and he's really into foraging his own food, making his own acorn flowers. There's a lot of similar threads between just the way you were living and the stuff that he does. So talk to me about that. Yeah, like how you got into hunting. Was it a family thing, and then how you progress and what you've seen in terms of the hunting scene? Because I think you used what was the term you said? I think, was it a compassionate hunter, or and you had something you said, and I thought I want to hear more about this.
Yeah.
So just jump into all that.
Yeah, sure. So hunting, the origin of hunting for me personally, has kind of two avenues. One is a profound one, and one is a really silly, simple one. And the profound version is that my grandfather was a very well recognized hunter in Austria, which is where I grew up. And he was like a known hunter, and he, legendary. So I grew up in his farmhouse, seeing the taxidermy, eating the meat, seeing him go off, hunting with his rifles. And in Austria, it's a completely different thing. It's very high profile. Very few people do it. Only landowners are allowed to do it.
Oh, wow.
You have to go through rigorous examinations to get your hunting license. You have to go through rigorous examination to get your firearms license. And then you have to do every year follow-ups on making sure that those licenses can be reissued every year. So follow-ups meaning tests.
Right.
So lots of respect in the hunting community in Austria. Very, very small amount of people do it. So that's kind of perhaps lit something in me that I
Yeah.
didn't recognize until much, much later, which was in
Right.
my early 20s. And then here comes the very non-profound version that got me into it, which is um, a buddy of mine in college. He was actually the boyfriend of a friend of mine in
Okay.
college. Um, so I talked to the friend, the girl, who we just went to a class together and was chatting, and I was like, "Oh, where's your buddy?" And his name was Ryan, and she's like, "Oh, he went deer hunting for 4 days in the mountains," and it just kind of like, and that was it. I was like, "Holy shit, that sounds amazing,"
That sounds
and I
amazing.
didn't. Yeah, I was like, That's all she said was like, "Oh yeah, he went deer hunting in the mountains for 4 days," and just that phrase is what uh, is what ended up causing me to initiate this whole interest and
Yeah.
caused me to investigate it. Like I said, perhaps there was a spark there from growing up with it, just being surrounded by it, but that's what ended up being the catalyst that just catapulted me into the hunting world.
And
Yeah,
how old were
very
you?
interesting.
How old were you when that that phrase
Yeah, well, yeah,
was uttered and
right.
you took the
Yeah,
pill? What? How old
I
were
think
you?
22.
22. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
a young buck, so to speak.
A young buck, yeah, indeed. Yeah,
So
yeah,
from there, yeah, where did you go then? How did that? What happened? And yeah,
yeah,
what happened from that point on?
yes. A very slow and arduous process. I also happen to be a huge Tolkien fan, so of course, hunting with a bow was for me the only way to go.
Right.
But I didn't have a bow. I didn't, shoot arrows or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it ended up really with getting the weaponry, becoming familiar with the weaponry, and this was all strictly just stick and string bows, recurves. Um, and I would say a good 3 years passed with me wanting to hunt and considering myself a up and coming hunter without ever actually going hunting.
Mm,
And it probably took another 2 years before I consider myself having gone on an official hunt. So from the origin
wow.
at 22, it probably took until I was in my almost later 20s before I really went on what I would call an official hunt. And let me kind of back up for a minute because there's a lot to what I consider hunting. It's not just, and I don't have anybody around me who hunts. I don't have somebody who can take me out. This is all coming 100% from my own interest and drive.
Yeah.
What I consider like going hunting requires a lot of skills, a lot of layers of knowledge, and I really wanted to be well versed in all of those before I would go out and consider taking the life of an animal. And this is all. So I have a master's degree in wildlife biology. So I've studied animals. I've dedicated a very large portion of my life to conservation and environmental science as it pertains to animals.
Yeah.
And so animals are incredibly important to me. They play a huge role in my life daily now and have always. So before I wanted to go out and actually hunt something, it was thoroughly important to me to be not an expert, but very well versed in all the layers, and that's
Yeah.
knowing your weapons, knowing how to use them well, and then having the understanding of the wilderness, knowing how to navigate in the woods, knowing how to pack your gear. So being an expert on actually what you need to be out there in the woods for a week, 10 days at a time. So you need to be a gear expert too. Knowing how to manage your food and weight on your pack. Because if you go out there and you're carrying a 50-pound pack and you shoot a 130-pound buck, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting that back. So
To say the
understand,
least, right?
yeah.
God.
So understanding those kind of variables, and then of course understanding where to go hunting, based on regulations and zones and licenses and tags. And then finally, when you're outfitted and you have your weapon and you have your tag and you know where to go and you know when to go, and you finally feel like you have the skill set to do it, and you're standing out there in your camo, then you still have to find the game, right?
Right,
Then
right.
you have to understand animal movement patterns and habits and what they do when, and how they travel from one area to the next, and what are the highest chances of you getting close enough with your weaponry to actually take a life ethically and quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to that point, then what do you do with a dead animal? How do you
Yeah.
how do you then field dress it and process it and break it down and pack it out and deal with the meat that you can't pack out and then have to come back for later. And then you finally make it back. How do you then deal with large chunks of meat that are potentially not cooled down yet? And how do you process that in your kitchen? How do you make sure that you can actually have that meat be high quality in a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now?
Right.
And then how do you cook it? So like all these layers, right? Like the more I looked into it, the more skills there were for me to learn. So it really took a long time for me to make it out there and feel like I was actually okay hunting
Yeah.
and killing something.
Well, I mean, God, right? So just as you're going through it, I mean, I think some of these threads have probably been in people's minds if they thought about hunting, and some of them had not. I mean, a few, as you were saying, I thought, God, there's so much to this that you do need to be well versed in. There's a lot to consider. So when you started getting into this process and you started, you had all your skills, you got good with your weapons, and you actually started like tracking and started doing this stuff and started hunting game.
Mm-hmm.
When you're out there, so yeah, I guess it's a two-pronged question.
Yeah.
Is there a connection to the land and just being in nature for that long that you begin to love just because you're outside and doing what you love? But then also, does it just get exhausting and tiring when you're not able to? I'm sure you've had hunts that have not gone particularly well. What's the harmonizing balance? Like how much of it is therapeutic and how much of it is just gritty hard work? Is there what's that dynamic like when you're out there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one of the foundations of hunting, I would say, is what you're describing there, because you have moments that are just absolutely magnificent that you really only experience when you're hunting, which are amplified by hunger, because you can't really bring a lot of food because you have to consider the potential of bringing out meat. So every time I'm out there hunting, I'm typically hungry. I'm bringing minimal food, usually freeze-dried meals for the evening, and then very simple snack-style lunches for the day, like energy bars and high-fat jerky, things like that. So being hungry and being in the wilderness while looking for game to hunt is a very potent combination to heighten your senses, right?
Yeah.
So like you're out there with a really heightened sense of everything. So that then, if you have like a beautiful sunrise, or you have, two squirrels like, playing with each other, or something that would be like really kind of sweet and almost profound under normal circumstances if you're standing next to your car. When you're in a situation where in the backcountry, you've worked for it, you're hungry, you're heightened, it amplifies everything up to the next level.
Yeah.
But so that kind of plays into kind of like the beauty aspect, where you can really find incredibly profound moments of appreciation of being where you are. That is definitely paired with suffering, no question about it.
Yeah.
And being okay with discomfort is one of the most important virtues of being a hunter. If you're not okay with being uncomfortable, you will not be a hunter. Guaranteed. That's a make or break situation.
Yeah.
Because it's absolutely inevitable. Even if the hunt goes really, really well, you're still waking up very, very early in cold conditions because that's when the seasons for big game is.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're hunting in the mountains, inevitably you're going to be sitting still, very cold, often in variable weather because fall time can bring that in the mountains. So you're really set up for a recipe for terrible suffering. And you have
Right.
to be okay with that. If you're not okay with that, that's it. It's a make or break. So you go out
Right.
there knowing that the hunger, the 3:30 a.m. wake up call when it's sideways sleet outside, and putting on your wet boots and getting out there, the combination of that, it really brings everything, and then knowing that you're probably going to have these profound moments of peace and tuning in that you just can't get under other circumstances.
Yeah. Well, and so I know right now, like, there's half the listening base is like, well, I'm out. Like, I'm so not doing this. Right?
Right.
That sounds horrible. Thank you. Wonderful
Yeah,
podcast, and I'm out now.
it's tough. Yeah.
But then there's going to be a whole slew of people like myself where, like, it's intriguing, right? Now it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, like, there's something here to be challenged by too, which,
Oh yeah.
like a lot of guys like a good challenge. So there's that piece, right? I can tell right away. It's like, oh yeah, like, this is very difficult. I'm glad I asked that because it sounds
Yeah.
like there's a lot that could go wrong, and you're going to be uncomfortable. But I wanted to just support that because I think a lot of people do challenging things. I would say that adage that you said, being okay with being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
that's good in any aspect of life.
Yeah.
Being
Sure.
learning how to be uncomfortable
Yeah.
in life and being okay with it, I think, is such a good it's a good thing to practice, right? Just to be in touch with. And I think if we can pursue activities that do that for us, I think, because it's all training, right? In the larger context. I'm not sure, do you listen to Joe Rogan's podcast at all?
I do.
So he's
Sure.
talked about that with jujitsu, right? He's like,
Uh-huh.
it's so challenging, it's so hard. He's like, but you're essentially being mock killed repeatedly
Right.
through a class, and sometimes
Right.
you're put into very uncomfortable positions where someone smaller than you just has better skill, and it's just a terrible feeling to have that hit you. So
Yeah.
as you're talking about this, it just makes me think about putting ourselves and practicing things that are life-giving and good for us, but that are uncomfortable. There's some merit in that in the bigger picture. So that's pretty cool. So with so with the struggles, right, of the hunting scene, and knowing that it can be really hard and really
Yeah.
difficult. Talk a little bit about, so once you've had your beautiful moments, you've had your shitty moments. Let's say you're lucky enough to bring an animal down, and you're talking. Let's circle back to that the ethical kill, right? So
Yeah.
of course there's going to be vegans that are very triggered, right? There's no way to ethically kill an animal. Of course, there's that whole demographic. But talk to me about what that means to you, and talk about the ethical killing piece, because you're going to
Yeah.
taking a life. What's that mean by your standard?
Yeah, yeah, you're really hitting one of the heart of the controversies of hunting, right?
Yep.
Which is really, it's a great thing to talk about because it raises a lot of really important issues, and even that pertain to other things in our society.
Yep.
So I love everything about hunting. I love the preparation. I love the gear. I love the weaponry. The wilderness aspect, the field dressing and the cooking and the eating and the sharing. I hate the killing.
Yeah.
I hate the part where you have to kill the animal. It's the one piece. It's a minuscule moment,
Yeah.
almost infinitely small,
Mm-hmm.
because it has to be a decision rather than, it ends up being a physical action, but it has to be the moment where you make the choice. So it's at almost like the speed of a momentary decision.
Yeah.
And that moment is really very powerful and hugely emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and then you have to commit to it, and see it through. And it's a really awful piece, that to me, I really, really don't like. But it is a piece of hunting. It's part of hunting. it's the duality, right? It's that's just how it goes. A package deal.
Yeah.
If you want to be a hunter and acquire your own meat, you have to kill an animal, and to do it in a way that is ethical and the most conscious as possible. There are several things to it. One very practical, and that's choosing the right weaponry and knowing how to use it. Right, very practical thing. I killed a deer with a recurve bow one time, and I immediately bought a rifle. And to me, and this is an argument that I love having, and that can be argued, and I value both sides of the argument. But I feel very confident that a rifle with the precision and the amount of force and the damage that it does internally in a body are going to be a faster way of death. And that's one of the things you have to consider as a hunter. What is going to... So if we unpack your question a little bit and we dive into this uncomfortable place of killing, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it's, like I said, it's a very uncomfortable thing to consider. And I have to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever actually spoken about this. What will kill an animal the quickest way? Yeah. And you have to think about a lot of things there. So how is it going to be unnoticed so that there's no stress to the animal? How is it going to happen in the most precise way so that whatever thing that you're firing at that animal will land in its body in the correct place and create the most amount of damage while still keeping some meat intact? It's another consideration I always do as well. And have the least amount of time for death, right? So those are the things that I've considered, and with that, I've gone to rifle. I'll never kill a large animal with a bow anymore, because I don't feel like it does it as quickly as a rifle. So that's one of the pieces. Yeah. And then, of course, the other is that every time you're in a position while you're hunting where you're able, or you have the opportunity to take the life of an animal, that is, you see one, you're close enough, that you can never, ever take a shot unless you're 100% confident that that shot will kill the animal. So that means there's potentially brush in between you and the animal. You don't have a very good way to rest your weapon so that you have a still shot. Those are some of the considerations for making a clean kill. Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It really is. I mean, it's a big topic, right? There's a lot. There's a lot there. There's a lot here. Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's so many, and it's a metaphor for a lot of other things. Like you said, it's very poignant in terms of the relationship between other things in our society, how we think about things. And I think there's this big, right, the contention, which I can understand. I was vegan for a while. It didn't work for me. I was vegan for, I think, a year and a half or two in my early 20s.
Oh, wow.
And I did it. I went back to eating meat. And this whole notion of taking... I think there's the piece, if we eat meat, there's a reasonable... And I've talked to a lot of people that do eat meat. It's pretty reasonable for the meat eaters. When I have this discussion, people say, if we're going to eat meat, it's pretty reasonable to know what it takes to kill an animal. If you're going to do that, if you're going to eat chicken, you should know what it's like to kill a chicken. If you're going to eat cow, you should know what it's like to kill a cow. If you're going to eat deer, you should know what it takes and what it requires. And a lot of people, they do. They it seems reasonable to the meat eaters. I had, the first time, I had never seen a chicken slaughtered up until about... It wasn't that many years ago. I saw it happen, from beginning to end, and it was done quickly. And I remember watching it, and I remember just thinking, God, it's so gruesome, just watching an animal be killed. It was fast, but putting it in boiling water for a second to pluck the feathers, and taking the gallbladder out and just gutting it and tearing it apart, and you're just like, Jesus Christ. brutal.
Yeah, right.
And I felt bad,
Brutal.
and everyone was just, like, oh man. And the guy that was doing it was just very, like you said, very skilled, knew exactly what to
Hmm.
do. And an hour later, we were eating it. It was chicken soup. We were
Yeah.
having chicken, and I remember everyone was eating it, and everyone was like, wow, this is really good. But there was also a level of reality to the meal. There was a certain level of acknowledgement, and it wasn't just like everyone was all shits and giggles, right? There was a presence.
Right.
There was a presence to the people eating the food because we had all watched it be killed. So I think there was a certain level of gratitude that we all had, and it actually made me. I don't know. It made it more of a. There was more presence. That's the best way I can say it. I just felt
Yeah.
more present for the meal, more grateful for it, and we all thanked the chicken. I mean, there was definitely that
Right.
piece, like, thank you, chicken, for
Yeah.
giving your life so we can eat. So when what do you say? I mean, I'm sure it's not. You've probably had this conversation. The people that are diehard vegans, right, who are just like
Hmm.
taking life as cruel in any capacity, right,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they argue from that place. How do you navigate that terrain? And I know you're not like on a political stage, defending this,
Yeah.
and you're not like this huge public figure who's Mr. Hunter of the world. But when you've
Hmm.
had these conversations, person to person, how do you navigate that dialogue? Like, what do you say,
Yeah.
and how do you keep your stance? Like, what do you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I love talking about this.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's a very potent, controversial topic. There's
Yeah.
no way around it.
Yep.
Yeah. So like you were saying, you tried to be vegan for a while. It didn't work for you.
Yep.
I didn't even get to that point. I love eating meat.
Yeah.
It does really good for me in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And like 97% of Americans, I'm there with them on being a meat eater. And but I'm also a biologist and a lover of animals. So that puts me in a tight spot. That puts me in
Yeah.
a conundrum, right?
Yeah.
I have a profound appreciation for animals, but I also want to eat them. And
Right.
I recognize the health, right? So it's a tricky place to be as a person who considers those things, right?
Yeah.
So the things that I would say are, one, that, like I said, I love eating meat.
Yeah.
The healthiest way, and by healthy I mean most sustainable for environmental purposes, the quickest, most ethical way, and the quality of meat and the quality of the life of the animal. There's no question that if you're going to eat meat, the best way to do it is by hunting. Because you're not supporting a commercial industry of raising animals in a terrible industry, right?
Yep.
Under terrible conditions, etc.
Sure.
We all know that story.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not supporting that.
Right.
So you're not putting any infrastructure or money into that direction. The habitat and the environment that animal lives in because you're standing in it while you're
Right.
searching for that animal.
Right.
You know how the kill happens. So hopefully, if you do it ethically, then it's going to be fast and humane. I would say the death of an animal in the circumstance of hunting are time-wise, from when the shot is fired to when it's completely dead, always, less than 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a matter of seconds, and it has no idea that it's going to happen. And that, to me, is the big piece.
Yeah.
Whereas in commercial meat industry, that's not the case.
Right.
Or for the most part, especially for the
Yeah.
larger animals.
Yes.
So the ethical killing piece. And then once the animal becomes meat after it's dead and has been appreciated, then it only passes through my hands. It doesn't pass through hundreds of other hands that have packaged it and put it in, into other, packages and then froze it and then
Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
The
then
processing.
broader,
Right.
all the processing.
The
Who knows how many
the
people
large
have?
scale processing, right?
Yeah, and how much time that takes, and all that stuff goes away in the hunting process. So it passes through two hands, right? Mine,
Right.
and it goes directly into my refrigerator. So, in short, if you're gonna eat meat, hunting is gonna be the best way.
Yeah.
A vegan will say, well, don't take the life of an animal.
Yeah.
Just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's one of the more. This is an area that it gets a little bit blurry because, unfortunately, and what I wish would be a little bit more common knowledge is that for us to acquire any food, if it's meat or not, many animals die. Wheat fields and cornfields are full of life, including deer. Ground nesting birds. You have rodents. Many rodents. You have deer that fawn their young there. You have all kinds of life that happen in these huge agricultural areas that die, and it's shown by those machines that harvest wheat and corn and soy and things that we all appreciate as vegan foods. You have vultures and birds of prey traveling behind these machines because they know that when those machines harvest those plants, there's going to be a lot of dead animals there as well.
Right.
So that's one of the pieces that I think needs to be understood as well, is that animal death is incredibly widespread, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just apply to people who eat meat.
And this great points, really good points. And a couple things come up. This has been brought up. I've heard this in conversation when people talk about this. That, and this is a hard one, right?
It is
building a hierarchy, right? People will say, well, like animal life is, life is life, and you shouldn't take it ever. And I'm always brought back to that thing of like, I would say like I kind of disagree. I don't want to say that I'm superior to a cow, but on some fundamental level, I would say like, actually, I am. If someone said a person is going to be executed or an animal, I would very quickly say I'm going to go for the animal. It's just the human life is a different thing. It's in a different category than that. But then immediately, right, then that snowballs into, I'm an oppressive patriarchal male who just wants to dominate and kill. And therefore, you know what I mean? And things that you're immediately put into that Category. And it's like you said, it's a gray area. It's not just a black and white. And, interesting point too, Daniel Vitalis, who I think you've looked into a little bit. He was vegan for many years, and he started to become he didn't feel well, right? A lot of the typical, I would say, by long-term standards, people who do veganism, he fell into that category. He was getting pale, he was cold all the time, hungry all the time, had lost a lot of weight, didn't feel particularly good, didn't look particularly good, and he said what he kind of got back to was he realized he said there were no, like what Weston Price talked about, there's no multi-generational vegan cultures in the world, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10
really?
10 generations. He's like, they don't exist. There's not a single multi-generational culture, especially like indigenous, that are at their roots. He said it's never happened in history, right? There's never been this thing where people have excluded animal products to the point where, as a philosophy or lifestyle, it's almost like a product of affluence and of modern times that we can even do that. I mean, I remember traveling in different parts of the world too, and like the idea of veganism to people in those parts of the world were like, what? Like, why would you do that? Like, you want to starve? Do you want to? That doesn't even make sense. It was such a weird luxury sort of that they thought that if there's enough money and processing of foods you can make, fake plant foods kind of, and make them taste like meat. They were like, I guess, but otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So with this, I really liked your point though. I want to touch on that. You said that, so the ethical killing, right? The ethical taking of life. which is a very difficult thing to think about, right? I love animals, and that idea of basically it's ending it quickly, right? It's like you could definitely argue, right? It's not ethical to kill, but if you're gonna kill, then within that bracket of killing, there's a spectrum there of it being more compassionate, right? And
Yes.
and it the animal suffering less, right, or less duration of time. So let me ask you this: in a lot of the native cultures, when they would bring an animal down, they would pray. That was very common when hunters would go out. Native Americans, I read about this when they would take the buffalo down, which was a huge staple of their diet. And when they would take the buffalo down, it was immediately the first thing they would do was gather around the buffalo, say a prayer. They would bless the bear, bless the land, have gratitude for it, and then from there they would, begin to process the animal. So, have you? I guess when you do take an animal down, either internally or externally, do you do anything to acknowledge the life of the animal? Do you have any kind of process that you go through? Do you say something to yourself? What's that like?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing to like kind of step back is I'm a bit of a unique hunter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I would say I'm not a very accurate reflection of the main U.S. hunting community.
Yeah.
So just to kind of put that out there.
Yeah.
But yes, I have a huge amount of appreciation for the life of an animal, and perhaps even more so the population of an animal species. And when I walk up to a dead animal, I always lay my hand on the animal, and I just give my thanks for its life and that it has now become food that will feed my family. It's short. It's never more than 15 seconds, but it's always a moment. Always, inevitably. It's almost like automatic, where I just give my appreciation. And I'm a very scientifically minded person, and I don't believe that that animal is now running in the fields beyond in the universe somewhere far away. It's really for myself. I do that for myself so that I can acknowledge what I've done, and that I can relish in the combination of emotions that are pride and sorrow, and they're all mixed together, right?
Yeah.
You have happiness and sorrow, and you have this deep appreciation for the work you've put into getting to the point where you now have your hand on a dead animal.
Yeah.
Combined with the realization that you've just killed an animal.
Yeah.
And it's just a very potent mix of emotions that I sit in, that I surround myself. I dive into that for just a few seconds, and then I have to get to work.
Right. Because time is precious, right? With that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't have an hour ceremony, right?
Right.
Well, so the second question to this is, and maybe a personal one for you, but when you first started doing this, did you have a point where you cried ever for taking an animal?
I have one time. I'm not a crier. So it's just, I don't cry frequently. So I actually don't really cry very much at all. Maybe I should try doing it more.
It's good for you.
Probably healthy.
It's very good for you. Yeah. Crying's good.
Yeah. So I took it upon. I was wondering if this is going to come up, and it has.
It has. Here we are.
Here we are. Last year, 2018, I took it upon myself I made a long decision, and my wife, Deva, bless her heart,
Mm-hmm.
has talked to me a lot about this before that decision was made.
Yeah.
During the decision making process, I want to hunt a bear, and
Mm.
that's that. It was a long process,
Yeah.
perhaps years, but consciously, subconsciously, but consciously, it was many months of should I, shouldn't I, and then going through the controversy of, well, why would I shoot a buck, which, in my opinion, is one of the most magnificent animals in the woods,
Mm-hmm.
and I would hesitate to shoot a bear?
Mm-hmm.
Or why, and then why not just talk about why would I shoot a squirrel,
Mm-hmm.
but then not a bear? Why would I value a
Right.
life of an animal in a different scale, especially when you're talking about large animals like
Right.
deer? So I delved into kind of those controversies. Anyway, to fast forward a little bit, I decided to do it. Um, I got a tag and went up north to Mendocino into the Trinity Alps. And I did a lot of homework. I did a lot of work when I got into the field, and I ended up finding and killing a bear.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really hard hunt because I was on my own and I was quite remote, and it was a heavy animal,
Yeah.
clearly. Um, and it was a fairly dangerous, event for me to partake in.
Yeah.
And after I did my normal thing, and I felt, kind of calm about the whole thing. And then I had to field dress the animal there, and I had to do 2 loads back to camp, which was this very steep hike back to my base camp.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to pack the animal in 2 loads back to base camp. Luckily I shot the animal in the morning, so I had all day to process the animal down,
Yeah.
do everything really consciously, and take my time with it, and then bring 1 load to base camp, come back, pick up the next load, bring it back to base camp, and have everything there. At around 9:30 at night or so, when I sat around the fire, the whole thing just set in. That maybe it was a combination of going through the decision process of actually killing an animal. Maybe it was my emotional relationship with bears.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was that bears eat blueberries and scratch their backs on trees, and so do I.
Yeah.
Maybe it's this relatability.
Right. Right.
Whatever it is, I don't know what exactly it was, but yeah, I cried heavily that night,
Yeah.
alone around the fire.
Yeah.
um, Very intense, very intense emotional experience for sure. And why, I still don't know. I still don't exactly know why. Yeah. But yeah, definitely have shed a tear. A
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One, and I asked a close friend of mine who has hunted a lot of deer. He said, for the first 3 years when he got into hunting deer, he had a very similar relationship the way you have with bears, right? There's an affinity there for the deer, though, in his case. And he said for the first 3 years, he would only hunt, because I was actually surprised to hear how long, like, an entire deer lasts. It's quite a bit of meat, if it's a big animal, and he was just feeding himself. But the deer he would take, he said the first 3 years, every time he'd take the deer down, he would cry. It was just part of it. He said after 3 years,
Wow.
it kind of got out of his system. But he said every 3 years, and he's a real kind of like you. He's a kind of a rough mountain man kind of type. He's not like not a soft person by any stretch of the means. But he said it was just like every time he's like he just felt. He said part of it was there was a reverence, a respect, and he said and just the harsh reality of killing something. He said
Yeah.
it's ugly, it's bloody, your hands smell like blood, your stuff gets on you. It's a messy process. It's just very ugly when you're in it. And I was always surprised by that. But he said after 3 years, then he said he still said his prayer, over the animal. But the
Yeah.
tears stopped. But it took him 3 years, for
It's intense.
every deer
Yeah.
that he took during that time. So when you're out, let's talk about that. So you're tracking an animal like a bear. So I mean, it's almost hard to ask the questions because there's so many cropping up in my head about the process. So I'm just going to start grabbing the ones that come through. But if you're hunting an animal, that size, that could potentially, I mean, bears, right? But bears are dangerous. Like they could definitely make a move on you. When you're hunting something that big, how do you, yeah, essentially, how big was the bear? The bear that you took down, how big was it?
It's hard to say, because I don't have any means of
Yeah.
measuring out there, but it was probably shy, just under 300 pounds, 275 probably.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. Okay.
Yeah.
So with an animal that big, um, as you, yeah, how do you walk me through what that process actually looks like? How do you field dress
Yeah.
a bear out in the middle of the
Well, yeah,
woods?
yeah, right. Yeah, it's just you and the
Right,
bear habitat. Yeah.
right. Like, what do you do?
Um, so to put it in perspective,
Yeah.
I was hunting black bears,
Mm-hmm.
and black bears are far less aggressive and
Yeah.
much smaller
Yeah.
than their larger cousin, the brown bear.
Yeah.
And internally, as we know them internally, the grizzly bears and
Right.
that's all subspecies of the brown bear, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a bit of a different category. So the
Okay.
black bears, um, they're a lot safer to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
That said, they could really injure you quite a bit if you're not
Yeah.
careful.
Yeah.
The circumstances of risk are that you approach a bear that has cubs,
Yeah.
and it doesn't see any other way of protecting its cubs other than injuring you.
Mm-hmm.
Which admittedly is rare. That one, you have to find that situation, and then two, you have to be in a situation where the mother, the sow, is then so threatened by you and has no options of escaping other than hurting you.
Right.
Very rare for that to happen.
Yeah.
Another one would be you approaching a bear that's on a food source. Potentially, it has come across another dead animal, or it has killed a fawn or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
you come across it. Or you've injured it and it isn't dead, and you're approaching it.
Right.
Other than that, there's really no circumstance where you have to be at risk. So it's not gonna
Yeah.
hide behind a tree and attack you. It's not gonna see you and try and hurt you because it feels threatened by you.
Gotcha.
They're definitely fleeing animals that don't want to have anything to do with humans if they can help themselves.
Yeah.
So let's keep it in that kind of perspective. So
Sure.
in those circumstances, yes, I was out there alone. Yes, I was in bear habitat.
Yeah.
But really, the risk of me getting attacked by a bear were very, very, very low.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good context. So
Yeah.
that kind of puts
Yeah.
some of the, I mean, the
Yeah, puts it
natural
in
innate
perspective.
fear that I felt for you. I was like,
course,
damn, like
yeah.
yeah, it's like wow, man. Okay, so once the animal, so the black bear, you've taken the black bear down, and then
Yeah.
when you approach it and you realize it's dead, what's the 1st thing you do? Like, what's the first step in dismantling that animal
Yeah.
of that size?
It's the same thing you would do to a squirrel. It's all very applicable to similar animals. Of course, the nitty gritty changes based on the animal. So, a black bear has a very thick hide. A squirrel has a very thin hide. But the initial process is to get it into a position where you can process it. So if you're on a really steep slope with a bunch of brush around you, you may have to move it or do something so that you can actually handle it.
Right.
Or if it's submerged in a creek or something like that. So you have to
Right.
position it into a place where you can work on it, which can be very challenging in and of itself.
Yep.
In my situation, it was in a place where I could just access it and work on it. The first thing you do is start working the hide away from on the abdomen. You start working the hide away from the base of the abdomen, and just being really careful to separate the hide from the base muscle in the abdomen, and you work your way up towards the sternum.
Okay.
And you don't even go into the body cavity quite yet. You just kind of work away so that there's no hair that will contaminate. Because bear hair comes off really easily. So you want to try and it's also quite horse. It's quite stiff.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike deer hair, which is a lot finer and shorter,
Yeah.
you really want to try and avoid that for meat contamination. So just to back it up, the bear is now meat to me.
Yeah.
So now, once the bear is dead, it's no longer. You have to remove yourself emotionally from it being a living bear that was frolicking around in the meadows.
Yeah.
It is now your responsibility to turn that into a food source. So that's how I deal with it emotionally.
Yeah.
Because if you get hung up on like, okay, I'm cutting open a bear, then you won't get very far. You have to compartmentalize some of those emotions.
Yeah.
And cry it out later around the fire at 9:30 at night.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But right then you have to be, you have to step into the reality of the work that has to get done.
Yep.
So to kind of bring it back, and then so essentially the main initial objective is to remove the hide and expose the muscles. And then from there, you have to remove the intestines and a lot of the other organs that you can't use, especially with bear. Unfortunately, bear liver you can't use. A lot of times, bear kidneys you can't use unless it's a
why is that?
bear.
Why is that?
Because they are omnivores and they'll eat potentially carrion, dead animals. They eat a lot of very intense foods that the liver has to deal with because of their omnivorous diet. Luckily, where I hunt, I don't have to deal with this, but they potentially could eat garbage or
right.
But the biggest one is meat, right? If they eat dead animals that they find, which they often do, that's going to be a liver and a kidney that takes, that has to work hard, and over the years, that's going to take a toll on the organ, and it comes across, and you can have very high levels of vitamin A. You can have which in too high dose sounds healthy, but in too high doses will kill you.
Yeah.
You can have, if anything, just a very pungent, badly tasting, organ.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it affects the kidneys and the liver when you get into an older animal.
Got it. Oh, we lost you again. We'll see if you pop back up here. Just give it a second here. It should be popping back up. So for the people, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
All right, cool. Yeah, we had a little freeze again, so no worries.
Man.
It happens. Yeah, it's the nature of the beast, man.
The nature of the beast. Yeah.
So, so you were saying though. So where were we?
The heart you can eat.
Yeah, the heart. Okay, so the organs, right?
Yeah. Organs. The heart is just a muscle, right? I mean, it's an organ, but it's muscle tissue. So, out of a bear, you would really, unlike some other animals, where I take as much of it as I possibly can. With bears, you have to be a lot more careful. So, as far as internal organs go, you really only want the heart. And so the main objectives initially are to remove the hide, remove the internal organs, separate out the hindquarters from and the front quarters, so take off the rear legs and the front legs, and then remove the head as well. After this is all after the hide is gone, and then split it in, and then you have the multiple pieces. You have your two hindquarters, your two forequarters. You have what's called the saddle, which is the centerpiece, which has the ribs and the back straps, and then you have the head if you want to keep that, which I do, and then rolled up in a bundle the hide. So those are your elements after you've field dressed your animal.
And do you still? So when you keep the head and the hide, did you actually keep it as like a rug? Did you keep it as you have it?
I have it. Yeah, it's a rug.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. So the head and the hide, I did two separate things with. The hide I turned into a rug. With the and I had that done by a taxidermist because I just didn't have the time to do it. I
Yeah.
do have the skill to do it, which I've done with other hides, but I didn't have the time, and I wanted it to be right.
Yeah.
So I sent that to a taxidermist, and for a few $100s, it came back as a ruck.
Yeah.
And the head, um, I ended up taking the head, meaning the skull. The fur of the head was still on the hide. So ears and nose and all that was still on the hide.
Yep.
And then the head itself is now just a skull with the tongue and the brain and stuff inside. That I kept. I removed the tongue. I take that as meat. And then I bring the skull back to clean the skull. I boil it down. I remove the tissue. There's two very large muscles right up against the skull that attach to the top. Those can be eaten. Obviously, I take the tongue, which is an incredibly high quality piece of meat.
Yeah.
And then I boil down, clean up the rest of it. Of the skull, and then I clean everything out with some special tools, and then I bleach it in hydrogen peroxide, and then spray it with a protective like a urethane or a shellac, and you have yourself a beautiful museum quality skull.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's what I do with skull and hide.
Yeah. Impressive. Just the process. I mean, I can understand now as you're going into it. I mean, I think fundamentally a lot of us know there's a lot to hunting if you think about it for any amount of time, even if you're green to the topic like myself, who haven't done it. I think it's, even as you project into it, you can see there's a lot. But as you're talking about it, there's so much, and I can see why it took you so long. You said it was years, right, before you even went out and thought about like, okay, I'm gonna go out and do this. So when you're doing this, and you the carrying it out part, that's the part that always I've seen people. There's a couple questions that come up when you're bringing an animal out of a hunting scenario, right? You've taken the animal down. So there's two parts to this question. One, what do you actually carry it in back to base camp? That's one part of the question. And then two, I'm thinking about the stuff that these animals probably come into contact with. I'm thinking ticks, I'm thinking poison oak all over their fur, that kind of thing. So those two questions, how do you navigate those two pieces?
Yeah, we're getting into the weeds, so to speak. Like the realities.
Yeah. Oh, here we go again. Reconnecting. Sorry, viewers. This is the way it goes with Skype. There we go. Hey, you're back.
All right.
I have no idea why it's happening. This is like, it never happens this much. But so the two pieces in the weeds, you said.
Yeah, in the weeds.
So what do you do? Yeah. How do you?
So the carrying out piece is the simple part, because you put the meat into what's called a game bag, which is it's a glorified pillowcase, essentially. It's like a nylon sack with drawstring that allows the meat to have aeration, but no access from bugs. So flies that lay eggs. Right. So then you take those and you put those in your backpack, or you strap them to the outside. That's the kind of simple reality of carrying out meat. The other part is luckily simple to deal with, but you got to have a stomach for it, because a lot of these animals, especially in California where it's warm and brushy, and they are, I mean, there are some serious parasites out there. So lots of ticks, depending on where you are. You have bot larvae that live, bot flies that lay
under the skin, right?
In our case in California, it's actually in the nostril. So they lay an egg here, and then the thing, it's pretty gnarly. But that's a regular thing for deer. Yeah, I mean, almost, I would say, 3 out of 5 deer have a bot larvae in their nostrils. that you
Wow,
have
that
to.
much.
Yeah, a lot of them in California do.
Damn near like 60%. I mean, of the.
Oh, yeah, a ton of them do.
Wow.
I don't have the exact numbers, but it's
No,
a
no,
lot.
but it's a
Yeah,
lot, right?
yeah, yeah.
So if the animal has been, let's just say a deer, right, and they have just been, let's just say they have poison oak all over them, right? Like they've been bumping
Oh
through
yeah,
it, and they've
sure.
got the oils all over their fur,
Yeah.
and you're having to obviously touch this animal
Hmm.
very intimately as
Yeah.
you prepare it and process it. How do you not get the poison oak all over you? Like, what do you do to avoid that, or do you just eat the shit sandwich and come back rashed
Right.
out? Like,
That's a good question, actually. I don't react to poison oak, so I wouldn't know. Um,
oh, lucky you. I
yeah,
don't know if
so
I do either. I've never had it, so I don't know. But
yeah, but
huh.
the way I would deal with that if I were very sensitive to poison oak is donning gloves, and you may even
Uh-huh.
have to don elbow gloves.
Uh-huh.
Gloves that come all the way up to your elbow, and then you have to. And I'll do this when I skin an animal. I have two separate knives usually.
Uh-huh.
One knife that I deal with more on the outer surface, with
Uh-huh.
where there's hair and things that I don't like, glands and things that I don't want to have involved
Yep.
in the meat, and then a knife that I use on the inner surface. And that's the
Uh
kind of stuff you'd have to do to take the measures to keep yourself separated from, create a
right.
barrier between those kind of things. And ticks, yeah, you got ticks crawling on you. You have fleas, so many fleas.
Yeah.
Jump they jump all over you. And I mean, a buck I shot last year in the Big Sur Mountains. Um, I mean, there I must have come home with 200 flea bites, and it wasn't so much because of the animal having fleas itself. It did, but
Yeah.
the whole area there were just fleas in the bushes, and I mean, it was
Oh,
just,
really?
yeah, it can get
And
really awful
where was that again?
in the Big Sur Mountains. So
Big
like,
Sur. Okay.
yeah, so if you're
Wow.
basically driving, Highway 1, the Big Sur, windy,
Yep.
beautiful road, and you look to the ocean and you turn your head and you look uphill, like
Right.
those are the Big Sur Mountains. So that
Yeah.
up in there, which are actually quite intense hills,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
steep, brushy, and it can get very
Gnarly
hot.
terrain. Yeah.
Yeah, gnarly
Very
terrain.
beautiful, but very rough. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So with the, I mean, I asked the question, right? Just from coming from like, a health practitioner background.
Right, sure.
So Lyme's disease,
Hmm.
ticks.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people would be like, oh shit, like there's ticks all over you. So
Hmm.
how do you, yeah, like how do you navigate that? I mean, do you worry about that? Do you take any precautions to, protect yourself from the
Hmm.
potential tick burrow? Like,
Sure.
or do you just kind of, yeah, roll with it?
Yeah, you just have to be really conscious of it. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with this firsthand. I've
Hmm.
had a ton of ticks in me. Luckily, I've never had an issue with it.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that those ticks that cause Lyme disease, you never know the tick was there.
Hmm.
When I'm dealing, typically when I'm dealing with ticks, I have them crawling all over me because I'm
Yeah.
touching an animal that has them crawling all over it.
Right.
So I'm very well aware that there are ticks everywhere. So
Yeah.
that alone gives you enough, knowledge to just, be conscious of that. So when you're done with the work and you've eliminated the tick, you've skinned the animal and all
Right.
that's aside, and you're now in the clear, then you take your time and you just do a very clear observation to make sure that you are tick free, because you've just had the exposure. and
Right.
and then you keep monitoring every few hours and make sure nothing feels weird, nothing's funky. You keep looking, and just make sure. So that, I think that alone helps a lot.
Yeah. And does that and by the tick check, does that just mean like strip down naked and assess? Like just
Later.
make yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just make sure there's nothing crawling
For
around
sure.
anywhere.
Yeah, check the belt lines, and just the ankles and all the typical access points that you might have. When I'm dealing with it, it's mostly like the armpits, because I'm dealing with it from the hands first.
Right.
So
Right.
they might crawl up your sleeve or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I've never from hunting had a tick in me. The only circumstances I've ever had a tick enter me is from the times when I'm just in the woods,
Yeah.
and it's unknown to me that it's actually, you
And
know.
is it safe to say that the I mean, right? I mean, technically, right? They could be all around from where you're
Mhm.
processing the animal, but would you say that the risk factor goes down once you've got the skin off and once you've got the hair off the animal?
In
Would
a
you say
major
that?
way. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It pretty much eliminates it. Yeah.
yeah,
As
because
soon as,
that's
yeah, that's where they all are. As soon as you remove the hide, then you're in the clear.
right. And then when you put your that's funny, the glorified pillowcase, when you put the meat in there or the skin, if you want to keep it, you just keep all the ticks in the bag. I mean, is that kind of like they're still in the fur? Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, that would be the reality of it. There's a few ways to go about it, which I've never done.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, the bear that I took did not have any parasites on it. It had some like a bunch of like, vegetation knotted around in it, but it didn't have
Mm-hmm.
any. So this was in late September and in the
Yeah.
mountains, so it was cold, and it was okay in that regard.
Yeah.
And that's the only hide that I've kept from a big animal. Um,
Yeah.
but and I've never done this because of the situation, but um, you can hang a hide over a fire, and
Mm-hmm.
just the smoke, they'll just go right away from the hide.
Oh, right. Yeah. They're just
Yeah,
avoiding it. Right. That makes sense.
yeah, but that's one of the things you have to deal with. Yeah, and that's why you wash the hide when you get back to wherever you can wash it.
Right.
Yeah.
And out of the and maybe it's the same for bear meat and deer meat, but when you process an animal, what's your favorite piece of the
Mm,
animal? What's like the most tender, or what do you fancy?
right. That's a really good question. And that's a really hard one to answer because there's so many. So there's a scale, right? You have your really tender pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, to me, I think unfortunate, a lot of the very tender pieces are all very, very mild. They almost taste neutral.
Mm. Uh
Um,
huh.
so that would be your tenderloin and
Mm-hmm.
your rear backstrap loins.
Okay.
Uh, they're going to be the most tender, and very, very mild. They have a bit of a hint of game, but
Mm-hmm.
you could have somebody who has an aversion to game meat or never wants to try it, and you could just hand that to them, and they would never have a hesitation at all.
Yeah. Right.
Very mild. I like that the gamey flavor. I like the differences in flavors of meat that different animals bring with different diets and habitats. Uh,
Right.
so what I like to find is a medium between the flavor of the meat and the tenderness, and then also the diversity that you can use the meat to cook with. So
Uh huh.
kind of dishes can you make with it? Like
Right.
the
Right.
loin is versatile. So the loin being the backstrap, which are the two muscle groups that are along the spine,
Uh
in the
huh.
and then the tenderloin, which would be like your beef, the filet mignon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would be the tenderloin. That's along the spine on the abdominal side, so
Right. So
inside the body cavity. Yeah, on the
anterior. Yeah. Right.
yep.
Yeah.
So on yeah, if you think about the spine and you think about the belly side of your
Right.
spine
Right.
behind all the internal organs and all that,
Right. Right.
that's where there's two smaller muscles that attach to the spine. Those are the least used muscles, and those
Uh
are
huh.
going to be the most tender. That's the tenderloin,
Uh huh.
the filet mignon in a beef.
Right.
Um, those, along with the rear loins, which are on the back side of this
Mm-hmm.
of the spine, there's really only the only diversity you can get in cuisine with those cuts is in its surroundings rather than the meat itself. You pretty much have to cook it medium rare. It does you would just do an injustice if you've cooked that in like if you would braise it for a long time or you put it in the
Right.
crock pot, or
Right, right.
just something like that. You make a stew with it or something like that. It would be a complete injustice to do that with a loin or
Yeah.
extract. You really have to keep it intact,
Yep.
as something that would be the equivalent of, say, your wrist halfway up your elbow, and roughly that kind of width
Yep.
and dimensions. You take
Yep.
that chunk and you just have to sear that to a rare or medium rare, and then you can add sauces and you can slice it into medallions and do
Right.
add things and create dishes that way. But that's the only way you really ought to cook it. You could do a carpaccio, which is straight raw,
Mm-hmm.
which I've done a number of times, which is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you just have a very mild cut. To me, the favorite cuts are from the leg, from the upper leg,
Yeah.
because they're still tender, not as tender, but they're still tender, and you can cook them in a bunch of different ways. Um,
Uh-huh.
you can cook them slower, and they have more flavor and a little bit
Mm.
more what I would call a grain.
Yeah.
So you have like fine grained meat,
Yeah.
which would be your loins, and then a bit more coarse grained meat. Like, you could compare that to, like if you had a New York strip steak, that would be like a
Yep.
very fine grained meat. And
Yep.
then if you had, what's that Irish, a brisket, right?
Oh yeah,
A
brisket. Yeah.
brisket, that would be more your coarse grained meat, or
Yep. For
like
sure.
flap steak, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So there's a bit more of a coarser grain to the leg meat, and you can make steaks out of that. You can cook that slowly, and you could braise it, and it has a bit more of that mouth feel, um,
Mm-hmm.
and something to work with a little bit. And it gives you an immense amount of diversity, and it has that gamey flavor a little bit, uh,
Right.
that but not uncomfortable in any way, just a hint of it, just enough to
Right.
make you realize this is not beef or pork. So it's,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So though I would say the upper leg meat would be
Yeah. Like the spot that
favorite.
what you
Mhm.
like.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about people? Like, and this is the question, right? Like, for me, the answer, I have a bunch that I can list off a yes in my head, like why this is good. But what do you think in the larger context, right, of hunting, being willing to explore this whole dynamic, right? Getting out there, doing this. What do you think is the benefit? What's the benefit of
Yeah,
hunting?
that's a great question. Um, Yeah, can we just do like a repeat on the podcast and start with the time
Yeah,
wise and just like
right,
have
right.
another, because there's so many things to talk about. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
most important piece, the most important piece is conservation. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by conservation is wildlife conservation, is being able to support wildlife populations so that they can thrive in their natural environments.
Mm,
And what's often misunderstood or forgotten or not taught is that it was, and this may sound controversial, but it actually isn't. It's quite factual. Hunters are actually the reason why North America has such an incredibly healthy wildlife diversity right now. It's
hmm.
in the 1900s. Market hunting was rampant, right? Everybody, there were no seasons or tags, or hey, you can
Right,
only take one animal, or anything like that in the
right.
late 1800s, 1900s. And market hunting, you were allowed to just kill something and sell it, right? Market hunting, and it was rampant, and it nearly wiped out North American game species to extinction. And then a few players like Teddy Roosevelt and several others came in and said, "Wait a minute, we need to implement some. We need to implement some regulations to allow for these wildlife populations to come back. Let's
Mm-hmm.
limit this and that." And
Right.
it was also at the same time national parks were created, and it all happened all roughly
Sure.
at the same time. So it was and Teddy Roosevelt was an avid hunter, and the reason actually was selfish. He wanted more animals in his country so that he can keep
Ah,
hunting. So
right.
initially, it was actually kind of a selfish reasoning, but in the end, it ended up being immensely beneficial. And this North American wildlife model is now the most successful model for wildlife conservation on the planet, hands down. There's no other country that comes close to being able to reflect the kind of rebounds we've had in wildlife. That through management, careful management, and conservation strategies, that all has been driven um, initially by hunters, and then now mostly by hunters. And it's through several avenues. One is when I buy a license, I buy a hunting license, I buy tags, right? I buy 2 deer tags because that's all I'm allowed. I get a small game tag, I get a bear tag if it's applicable, I get a
Mm-hmm.
wild pig tag always. Um, Almost 80% of the money I spend for that money goes directly into state wildlife management. So that
Wow.
money, 80% of that. So let's say I spend $300 on that money. You know, over $200 of that goes to the state, gets put into a funding source that biologists can then access to do surveys of wildlife and management tactics and see what kind of population threats are there and what do we need to do for that. And the same goes federally as well. So there's an act called the Pittman-Roberts Act that was implemented by Teddy Roosevelt, um, where 9 to 11%, depending on what you purchase, of all things that you buy that are related to hunting. So that includes firearms, ammunition. Um, Actually, I take it back. It's not even related to hunting. It's um, it's all firearms and ammunition, and there's something equivalent to fishing too, called the Dingle and Johnson Act, which is the same thing. Any rod and flies and hooks and things like that.
Mm.
But for hunting, you have the Pittman-Robertson Act that takes 9 to 11% of every purchase you make related to firearms and hunting, and I believe things like binoculars and items like that. Don't quote me on all the periphery items, but for sure firearms. So that goes for
Yeah.
people who are recreational shooters, home defending shooters, whatever.
Yeah.
9 to 11% of that money goes federally to a fund that then allows for federal fish and game management to act on wildlife conservation. And they'll send biologists out there and they'll say, okay, a population is healthy. We're allowed to take this many animals out of the population through hunting. So this many licenses can then be issued without compromising the health of the population. So to me, the benefit of hunting is on a very large scale associated with conservation. I really, truly feel like I do my part in spending the money to then support conservation that then helps wildlife stay healthy. And it's
Wow.
reflected. You see that now. We have the healthiest wildlife population since before market hunting even started.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even just 20, 30 years ago, you could have, there's accounts of people saying like, oh man, when somebody saw a buck, they called their neighborhood, hey, we saw a buck, and
Yeah.
everyone checked it out. Or turkeys are now in every single state, or 49
Right.
states. I don't
Right.
know why.
Right. Right. Right.
Turkeys have come back immensely. Elk have come back incredibly well. They're unfortunately still only on about, I want to say, 15% of their natural habitat of
Yeah.
when they originally were before market hunting, but they've come back incredibly well. Deer, as we know, are rebounding incredibly well. And that's all through conservation initiated by money that's funded mainly by hunters.
That's so
And
crazy. That's so
yeah,
crazy to think about. I mean, that's
yeah,
that's
It's
a link.
counterintuitive, right? But yeah.
Yeah, but as you're explaining it, it's like you said, it's very logical also. So that's
Hmm.
an interesting piece to chew on, because I mean, that's news to me for sure. To hear that, I mean, that's a big one. I'm glad I asked that question.
Huge.
Like the
Yeah,
benefit of hunting,
absolutely.
there's a larger dynamic happening outside of just right your joy or preference for game meat. There's That's amazing that's actually
Yeah.
all part of that puzzle piece. That's really really cool. Well, so when you are hunting, the other logistical piece to this that I'm just curious, and maybe some other people are as well. In terms of rifles, like what's a
Hmm.
quality rifle that you think is fit for the job? What do you use, and what have you
Hmm.
seen, and what's good?
Sure. Yeah. As far as rifles go, you really want to first ask yourself the question, what is it that you want to hunt? And
Mm-hmm.
um, in North America, for the most part, it's all of when you're talking about larger animals, larger mammals, like the deer species, you're all kind of within a similar range. The exceptions would
Yeah.
be a moose or a very large elk. That
Mm-hmm.
would be on the upper range of the size that you have available. And of course, if you're interested in hunting brown bear, then that's kind of its own category because that's an immensely large animal.
Yeah.
Um, but there are several calibers that work incredibly well. They're all roughly the similar kind of quality, and it really is a preference thing depending on how. It might just be like what somebody told you is a better one than the other. They all do the same trick. Um, and they start at what's called a 270. And the 270 is um, that so the number itself is really just a size measurement of the projectile after it leaves the brass. So the brass, if you imagine like what a rifle bullet looks like a little rocket ship, and
Mm-hmm.
it's made up of two parts. Well, it's made up of several parts, but two main parts: the brass piece and then the projectile piece. And the brass piece only holds the black powder, and the projectile is one that flies out and does the job.
Right.
And the projectile diameter is where those numbers are. If somebody says, "Oh, I got a 270 or whatever," so
Yeah.
270 would be the decimals in inches. So 0.27 inches is kind of the diameter of the back.
Oh, gotcha.
So
Okay.
from 270 upwards, you get your 270, and then you go to 300, 30-06, 308, and then from there, there's subversions of those.
Mm.
So in that caliber range, 270, and then you have like the mag, which has more black powder behind it, which means that
Mm.
there's more hydrostatic force when the bullet impacts the animal.
Mm.
There's also a flatter trajectory of flight with a higher caliber, with more black powder, and longer reach. So those would be your 300 Win Mag. And anything with mag behind it really just means that there's more black powder.
Oh, I
Um,
see.
yeah, and in those calibers, you can get essentially any rifle that can carry that, and as long as it's made well enough, and all of them are because they have to compete with each other, right? You can't just
Yeah.
produce a really shitty rifle
Right.
that's just going to
Right.
die as a brand.
Right.
Then you're going to be having a weapon that's going to operate just fine. The two big things that people often forget about are one, optics. So optics are incredibly important on a rifle. You really ought to spend twice as much on your optics than on your rifle.
And the
Um,
optics is the
oh,
like the
the
scope, the
scope,
scope, the scope
the
that you're
scope
looking
on
through.
top. Yeah, right. Yep.
Yep.
So the scope that you're mounting on top of your rifle. Ideally you have $1,000 rifle and a $2,000 scope, then you're set up for life. It often doesn't happen like that, but uh,
Yeah.
if you can get basically with optics or scopes on top of rifles, you're getting what you're paying for. So the more
Yeah.
you spend, the better the optics within reason.
It
Um,
reminds me of photography, right? The camera
yeah, yeah,
is
yeah,
its
yeah.
own thing, but when you buy a lot of it, it's the lenses, right? Like it's the same
Absolutely.
same type of thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, that's great. What else? Is there anything else to that that you wanted to add?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to add is that the most important piece goes without saying, but has to be mentioned, is that you're the one doing the firing. You have to be the one, the shooter has to be the one that's the expert. You can get the highest quality rifle that you want, but you have to be an excellent shooter. You have to know exactly how your firearm system works, and how to implement it.
Yep.
That's the most important piece.
Where do you practice rifle shooting? Where do you actually do that? Is it? I mean, I haven't been to a shooting range in years, but is it the same?
Yeah.
Same bracket. You can just go. Like,
Yeah.
any type of gun can be fired there.
Yeah, yeah. You just go to a range, and
Just shoot it
there
up.
are indoor and outdoor ranges. And for a rifle, you're talking about distance shooting, so you have to go to an outdoor range, and you have to practice at minimally 100 yards.
Right.
So a football field, essentially is the distance where you're just practicing and getting it nailed down. And those are the circumstances where you're sitting on a bench and you have a very controlled environment, and you can, control the variables, and you're not very emotional, and your heart rate can be managed very easily, and you have a target out there. And that's where you have to just put holes in holes, right? You have to put that bullet into a tiny, you have to be able to feel confident that you can have a very small grouping, right? So that you can put 5-6 rounds into a 1/2 inch diameter. That's at 100 yards. You have to be capable of doing that. Otherwise, when you go out there, you're just going to be all over the place, because it's hard. It's way harder out there.
And no kidding. And it comes back to what you said at the very beginning, right? There's a full circle here. The skill, the development of the skill. There's various things you have to be good at to do this, to do it well, and to do it efficiently. Well, Daniel, I know I'm checking the time here. I know we're kind of running up on our mark, but the last thing I want to ask you, as a framework for people, if they've listened to this and they want to adopt some of the hunting into their life, right? They want to take some of these guidelines and parameters and bring them into their life, explore it, use it. Where do you tell people to start? Are there textbooks that they should read? Is there more or less, like, what's Daniel's manual? If you want to get introed into the hunting world, where would you tell people to start? Because this universe sounds pretty big, and you've been doing it for many years. So where do you begin so that it's not completely overwhelming?
It's inevitably going to be overwhelming, because there is so much, and this is one of the reasons why I love hunting so much. There are many, but it is such an overwhelmingly large task to be a good hunter. You have to, like I mentioned, the list of things you have to be good at, like the wilderness component, navigating in the woods, and understanding what it takes to be safe in the woods, with some survival situations considered, and the gear that it takes to be safe in the woods and how to use that gear, and then knowing how animals behave, knowing your firearm, knowing all the regulations and laws, and where you can go at what time, and which license to get when, and how to apply for those. And then getting out there, and then when you get a game, you get a game animal down, what do you do with that? The field dressing and all that stuff. And each one of those categories has its own subcategories that are, difficult. You could spend time on each one of those items. If you want to enter that world, which I encourage anybody to do, the best way to access it is with somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah. If you don't have that, you have to, if you don't have that, I did not. I entered the world with no knowledge and nobody telling me what to do. And I was stabbing around in the dark like a buffoon for years. And so it takes a long time. Yeah, it was hard work. So if you don't have that, assuming you don't have somebody
Right.
that can just give you the guidance,
Yeah.
the best place to do that, to get out there and get familiar with hunting, is going to be reading up on some books. And the best resource that I've come across that's contemporary and up to date now is by an author called Stephen Ranella, and it's just called The Complete Guide to Hunting and Fishing. Or is it just... No, I think it's just The Complete Guide to Hunting.
I love his show. I love his show, The Meat Eater.
Oh, The Meat Eater, yeah. It's a TV show.
It's a great show, yeah.
Yeah. So that's an excellent book, and he talks a lot about what gear to get and how to observe an environment so that you can find animals with your binoculars, and just kind of basic things like that. So reading up on that, and then finding an area that you want to hunt and sticking to that area. So, let me back up. If you have good resources and you have the money to do it, go on a guided hunt. Go out there with a guide. It's often if you're in California, if your listeners are in California, the cheapest way to go on a guided hunt would be a pig hunt. You could probably find one for $700-800, and that way you get to go out there with an expert. They can, help you out. They can show you the ropes, and that's one kind of catapulting way to just kind of jump into the whole like killing and managing an animal after it's on the ground piece.
Right.
That said, you have to, of course, already be a shooter, right? You have to understand your firearms, but starting with a good book and just reading up and just getting the intellectual piece into your brain and just understanding what it would take to do it, and then finding a piece of land that you want to hunt. So finding a national public land that's a national forest, land, could be a state park where hunting is allowed. So some kind of public access land that you're like, okay, so this is 2 hours from my house or an hour from my house. I can access this. And then go out there and familiarize yourself with what kind of animals are out there, the trails, and knowing what it takes to be in that environment. And just get out there and look for animals, because nothing happens unless you know how to find animals. You gotta know how to find an animal, and that can be very, very difficult because most of the animals you hunt don't want to be found, and they have very, very, very high senses and know exactly how not to be found.
Right.
So that is a very big challenge. And then, getting a book, getting out there and exposing yourself to the environment and the habitat of the game that you're trying to chase, and then get your weaponry and get familiar with it. Those would be the first 3 things that I would recommend doing.
No, that's great. That's a great baseline to start from, because I think, like you said, it's inevitably going to be overwhelming. I mean, obviously you can tell from that, but it's a good place for people to start should they want to orient themselves to this topic, into the process. So, well, Daniel, thank you so much for doing this and sharing your knowledge and opening up Pandora's box, so to speak, because there's a ton here, more than I thought, which is to be expected. So it was great having you. And if, I would love to have you on again at some point. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff we didn't touch on, but
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet, man. Anytime. All right. Well, till next time.
Okay. Till next time. Thanks.
All right. Take care.